Well, the season is over. It's in the books. 162 games are done. Now what? That's what we talk about right here. What is next for the Kansas City Royals? What are we wishing is next for the Kansas City Royals? We'll talk about that. We've got a few ideas, each of us, as to where they will go. What can we learn from the 12 playoff teams? What do the Royals compare as to the 12 playoff teams? Have we seen the last of Zack Greinke? Any lessons to be learned from all of baseball this year when it comes to regarding the Kansas City Royals? We talk about it next here on Kaufman Corner.
You're listening to Kaufman Corner, the most in-depth analysis of the Kansas City Royals, breaking down the Royals like no one else can. Kaufman Corner is hosted by Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro. Rany is a co-founder of Baseball Prospectus, author of Rany on the Royals, and former columnist for Grantland, The Ringer, and The Athletic. Soren is the award-winning afternoon drive host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. Kaufman Corner is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Now, here's your hosts, Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Curtis. It is Kaufman Corner. Rany. I'm Soren. He's Rany. That's how that works. Talking some Royals baseball here. Rany, can you believe it? By the way, if you're catching us via the podcast, thank you very much, first of all, for joining us. Also know that you can be a part of the conversation. We've got a number of people in the chat room ready to discuss the Royals 2023 season. Why, how? Sometimes I'm not sure, but they're there. God bless all of them. Sometimes I wonder, will we be talking to ourselves tonight? Rany, we never are. They're just a great, passionate fan base, even though the Royals gave them very little this year to get excited about.
Now, Soren.
Okay.
The Royals, no one makes the Royals lose 107 games in a season. All right, 106. I have no comment, but 100. Nobody makes the Royals lose 107 games in a season, and we could joke about that, but it is an oddly impressive feat. If you had told me 6 weeks ago, even that the Royals would not break or smash their all-time record for losses in a season, I would have been very surprised. They tied their record. They did not break it. They started 29-75. Let's not forget. They finished 27-31. They played almost 500 baseball for almost 2 months. So let's go out with a bang and let's celebrate a quasi accomplishment by our boys in blue.
I like it. I like the abject positive nature of the way you think there, Rany. But with the season over, anything, like you're like, other than, all right, we can exhale because it's no longer this year. Anything else jump at you that, now that we close the books on what 2023 is before we start talking about what we're wishing for next year?
Well, like I said on Twitter to promote tonight's podcast, the best part of the Royal season is the off season. So it's over. We can breathe. But I think that, significant improvement in wins and losses as the season went along does point to the one positive takeaway you can have from the season, which is I do think the Royals as an organization, as a roster, ended the season in a better place than they started it. I mean, the team in September was a better team than the team in April. You think about all the dead weight that they shed at the beginning of the season, Hunter Dozier, Jackie Bradley Jr., Franmil Reyes. Granted, two of those guys were brought in before the season to try and help this year, but those guys were replaced with, the likes of, Michael Garcia early in the year, but you see how Cole Reagans came in and was a revelation. And Nelson Velasquez slugged, 579 for the Royals. And this is a fun stat you might enjoy. James MacArthur, his September, what if I told you it was not just a really good month.
Is this the beginning of a 30 for 30? What if I told you?
What if I told you that James MacArthur just had the best month by any Royals pitcher in the history of the franchise?
I would say
Next on 30 for 30.
Yeah.
You don't believe me?
Because
it's true. By OPS against, like his opponents on base plus slugging, right?
Right.
In September, counting his October 1st, his final outing is September, which is by baseball convention. October games count as September. He, in 15 and a third innings in the month, 16 and a third innings, gave up 5 hits, 3 singles and 2 doubles, no walks, 19 strikeouts. His OPS against was 229. Of any Royal in any month in Royals history who faced at least 50 batters, that's the lowest OPS in a month ever. And that's a guy that the Royals, traded a minor prospect for in May, who was a 26-year-old journeyman reliever in AAA, and by the end of the season was having the best month by any Royals pitcher ever. Will that last? I don't know. But there's a reason why they were almost a 500 team for the last 2 months of the year. And it does give us it certainly gives me something to chew on about the state of the front office, the state of JJ Piccolo. One of the things, we'll get to our wish list, but one of the things I think you and I can agree on is like to see them make more trades, because the early returns on JJ Piccolo's trades have been pretty positive. So I'm excited to see what he does with a whole offseason in front of him.
Which takes us to where we're going to start our wish list. I'm excited to see your wish list. We have not compared notes.
Mm-hmm.
Rany always likes us to be a surprise. He's a surprise kind of guy. He likes it. So if you ever see Rany at the ballpark, run up behind him and give him a jolt. He likes surprises.
I like improv, Soren.
I know you do.
I go to improv comedy shows. I enjoy it.
Okay.
The give and take between the actors on the stage. That's what you and I are doing right now. So why don't you lead us in?
No, you lead.
I lead.
Yes.
Soren, the first rule of improv, you never say no. You say yes and. So when I say you lead, you say yes and.
And you go first.
Okay, yes, and I will go first. So my first thing on the wish list is a more foundational level is I want to see more additions to the brain trust, to the front office. I want somebody, they brought in the new scouting director. Great. That's not enough. I want to see more names. I want to see at least one more prominent name in the front office. I want to see whether it's adding, a new minor league pitching coordinator or a prominent, hitting coach. Hey, Kevin Seitzer at the end of the year. That's a wish. That's a wish that probably won't be granted, but I want to see the Royals continue to add organizational talent from other teams on the scouting and development side, because frankly, I think that's the single best thing they did last winter was bring in, Brian Sweeney and Zach Bove and Matt Quatrero, and they didn't do enough of it. And so I want to see more of that. But more than anything else, acknowledging that they don't have all the answers still, and that they need to bring in more answers from teams that have been successful, will make me feel better about the direction of the franchise.
All right. I will go. And I don't disagree with that. I like that idea. I would love to see it. I don't think you're going to get it.
That's why we call it a wish list.
Right.
Based on the fact that based on what happened last winter, where they started with some moves right at the end of the season, and then it got quiet on that front, I'm concerned that our new scouting director may be the extent of it. We'll see. There's the press conference tomorrow, and I have a feeling though if they're going to do something, it'll be in the next 2 weeks. So I am hopeful, but I'm not expecting much.
Yeah. So I hope you're right. I think we'll see maybe some scout changes in some of the boots on the ground type scouts, but I don't even know if we'll even be aware of that until that's the kind of thing they put out when they go, here's the whole organization right before spring training. So I don't know that we're going to be seeing information like that get out, but the kind of move you're talking about is a name that would warrant a press release, and there would be chatter about it. And I don't think we're going to get that. And I'm with you. I'll back you up. I would like to see that. I don't have that as one of my wishes, maybe because I'm more of a realist and not a dreamer the way you are, Rany, dreaming the dreams. But I'll go with my number one is, and it was up there, a couple of here, Bake Dayton Moore, transactional is the key word. Last regime wasn't interested in anything transactional or even, okay. And I didn't go all the way there. I'd see where that finished. But, the transaction part of things, yes, that's number one. Trades. I want trades. This roster does not fit. And I expect there to be deals to, one, move some catchers. I think they have to put this roster together. It has to fit. It has to be a real baseball team, and that starts with dealing something, and it's going to mean dealing players or benching or sending down players that have been part of the core. I'm not watching MJ Melendez drag his bat out there for the stat lines that he did. If they're going to put MJ Melendez out there, he better hit, and it has to be significantly better than what we saw this year. I don't want to see him in right field. I want this baseball team to fit together, and the only way that it's going to fit together like a real baseball team is for them to make trades. And so, pitter patter, let's get at her. This needs to be one where we see a number of trades made, even if some of them don't make sense, because it's just like kind of Adalberto Mondesi. That's got to go. We've got to get that out of the way so this can play. Now, I don't see the Bobby Witt Jr. banging on the door at shortstop like, was there, but they have to be more transactional, and that means they have to make trades to make this roster fit. So you can call it roster fit, you can call it trades, but there's no way that this team should go to spring training without some significant changes, and the only way that those changes can be made is by making trades.
Absolutely. In fact, my number 2 on my list was not just they have to be more transactional, but specifically I want to see them they need to trade a veteran and they need to trade a young guy. They need to show the ability to do both, right? The veteran is sort of the no-brainer, the no-brainer move that Dayton Moore never seemed to make, which is trading the guy who's good now on a bad team before he loses all his value. Specifically, I'm just gonna put it out there, in part to prepare. I want to get the fans ready for this, but I think the most obvious candidate for this is they need to trade Salvador Perez. Specifically,
agreed.
Salvador Perez, he has value now. There is value, out there. Teams will trade for him. But when I say trade Salvador Perez, they need to trade Salvador Perez and pick up at least 2/3 of his contract. They need to convert their money into prospects because they have the money. Their payroll was not particularly high. We may get into that in a little bit as well. They can afford to spend more money, and frankly, they're already spending that money on Salvador Perez. Like he's, more than half of the dollars they have committed to payroll for next year is Salvador Perez. So, even if they, pick up 80% of it, they're lowering their payroll. So you're only going to get talent for him if you pick up most of that contract, at least half, but I would say 2/3. If you knock down 20 million down to 7 million for teams, 2 years and 14 million, there are a ton of teams that will be interested in, a catcher who is incredibly durable, who has shown the ability, to not just to be a great player, but to be a great postseason player, very well respected. I don't need to sell people on Salvador Perez, right? The question is, does he have anything left in the tank? He didn't have a great year. He didn't have a bad year. And you know what? You'd rather trade a guy 1 year too early than 1 year too late. And it's quite possible if they wait for the trade deadline in July, he will, if he has a bad first half, he'll have no value whatsoever. Trade Salvador Perez, let Freddie Fermin start behind the plate. That's fine. And then trade a young guy. Show willingness to gamble on trading the wrong guy in the hopes that if you've identified your players correctly, which of your young players are less likely to reach their potential. I think we've talked about MJ Melendez, and MJ Melendez had actually a very good second half. Like if you look at his offensive numbers, let me see if I can pull it up here, but he had, I believe, an 830 OPS after the All-Star break. Now, if you believe in that, okay, maybe you build around him. But if you don't, you can certainly, he certainly has restored some trade value because he hit well enough that even if he can't catch, there are some teams out there that will look at that as a guy who can contribute in a major league lineup, even if he's playing the corner outfield or DH or first base or whatever. But if you think that he's unlikely to repeat that, trade him now while he still has some value. I've mentioned Michael Massey's another guy that might have some value, and they can open up a spot for Nick Lofton. Now, of course, you don't trade guys just to trade them. You're trading them to get prospects. You got to identify players in return. But given what JJ Picollo did this in the span of 3 months, identifying not just prospects, but guys like Cole Reagans who were sort of on that bubble between prospect and major leaguer, I'm willing to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt if he goes out and trades for a player that I don't, isn't a top prospect or was a prospect, but is now, failed at the major league level. Like, I think he's actually earned some credibility there. But part of getting talent is giving your own talent away. And the Royals have some players they can give up on, which will actually improve the shape of the roster as well.
Yeah. And I agree with the moving of Salvador Perez. I think it makes all the sense in the world. On the MJ Melendez part, I mean, yeah, maybe he's starting to hit better, but like he has no place to play, right? Like that's and I don't even think he can catch. So although he was a little bit better after working with Paul Hoover this past spring training, and they immediately dumped that, which to me said that they looked at it and went, no, Mike Sweeney, this guy, this isn't going to happen. And so to me, that's where I talk about the team having to fit, right? I don't want a catcher running around in the outfield. He's it looks good running the bases, but he's not an athletic outfielder, right? That doesn't translate. That kind of fluidity does not translate into his ability to play the outfield. So get him out of there, right? Like so that's where I'm talking about. Like,
and I'm not sure he has the work ethic to work at becoming a good outfielder. There's also that. Like, does he put in like so you don't hear stories about guys being like lazy, but you won't hear the stories of them being hard workers. Like Bobby Witt, we've heard so many stories about how hard he works. Right. I haven't heard that many stories about MJ Melendez. Maybe I'm just missing them. But if you feel like MJ's not committed to putting, because at this point it's going to take a lot of hard work for him to become even an average corner outfielder. If he's not willing to put that work in, then maybe, you sell him as just a bat and anything you get with the glove is a bonus. But there are teams out there looking for a bat that might take him.
Yeah. All right. So that was your number 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
My number 2 is bringing in a legit starting pitcher. And despite our going round and round about Jordan Lyles, up from Jordan Lyles, right? I mean,
you're sure, Soren, you want to set the bar that high?
Yes.
Okay.
Up from Jordan Lyles. I believe that one of the things that I do appreciate that Jordan Lyles did, and by them, whether he deserved it, earned it, or not, but it meant that they weren't just giving every one of the young guys a spot. And I think that has to continue. They've got room on the payroll to add money and finding a pitcher. And I think this is probably more in the comes back in a trade type, more so, I think, more realistically than winning the bidding out on the free agent market. But I don't really care which way it happens. But I do think another legitimate starting pitcher has to be brought into this team. One, just to make the ball club better, to give the players that are developing an opportunity, to actually play meaningful baseball and develop their skills. But, I think most likely it's probably in the trade market with what we're talking about here. MJ Melendez goes for a 33 or 34-year-old starting pitcher that you can feel good is going to throw 175 innings. Some teams like, we got too much pitching. We need to unload this guy. We'll take a shot at this bat. Whatever it might be. That doesn't have to be what the deal is. Don't get bogged down on who I was saying, but they have to go get a pitcher that you can plug in and say every 5th day this guy's going to go. And I think that's important. We'll talk about Zach later, but I'd still be open to Zack Greinke if he wants to continue to apply his trade. Let me see what he looks like when you put real defense around him,
right.
As opposed to what the shenanigans that were going on to start the year. I'd still like to see that, but they have to bring in an arm, in my opinion, a legitimate every 5th day arm for this club.
Yeah, I agree, and that sort of ties into my third my third thing on my wish list, which is to spend some money. Basically, is to raise the payroll. The payroll was around, depending on which sources you use, the way that they calculate it, differs from one site to another, but around 92 million, which I believe came in around 24th in all of baseball. The Royals don't have to run a top half payroll right now, but they have some room to move there. But also, their payroll's dropping significantly, and as the roster stands right now. I mean, right now Zack Greinke's not under contract for next year. Salvador Perez, and if they trade Salvador Perez, even if they pick up most of it, they're going to probably lower that as well. So right now, I think they only have like $39 million in obligations for next year. I mean, they have 4 guys, I believe, who are actually under contract for next season. And that's counting Hunter Dozier. So really 3. It's Salvador Perez, it's Jordan Lyles, and I wouldn't have guessed the last guy if you had paid me. It was Jake Brentz, who coming back from Tommy John surgery has like I think a $1,025,000 or $1,050,000 contract for next year. So the Royals have tremendous payroll flexibility. Yeah, there's a lot of arbitration eligible guys, etc. But that's not going to get your payroll. I don't even think it's going to get back to the 92 million that they had this year, let alone raise it. So they have money to play with. And I agree that they should add a starting pitcher. Sure, if you could trade for another Cole Reagans, fantastic, wonderful. But that's Cole Reagans level trade. That's a once in a decade kind of opportunity. If JJ Piccolo can find a second Cole Reagans, then I mean, everything else is moot. If you can just find aces more than once a season, then he's going to be the best GM that ever ran a team. So I'm thinking of spending some money here. And now they could be really bold and go after like an Aaron Nola type free agent. That's a real pipe dream. I know the Royals are just not built to spend that kind of money. But
he's not. What would it, I mean? What kind of offer would the Royals have to give to beat out the Red Sox? And I'm not talking about just the dollars. I mean, how much beyond? As opposed to going to a team that looks like it's going to contend, the Mets, whoever it might be. I mean,
Nola is like right on the border. He's not. There are some question marks with him, so the hope is that you don't have to like go insane and give an 8-year deal or something. He had a 4.46 ERA this year. He's the kind of pitcher that fits the ballpark really well. He gives up home runs, fly ball pitcher, but great command, good strikeout rate. But you're probably still talking minimum of 5 years. I don't know, 120 million, something like that. That's just a wild guess. I mean, it would be the most lucrative contract the Royals have ever given out.
That would be the market rate. What would they have to give?
Well, I'm hoping maybe they can get him for that. I think it's a pipe dream that he would only get that amount, but maybe his best offer out there is 100 million and you top it by 20. That would be my hope. Or you go to 6 years. That's a huge risk, but if JJ Piccolo is willing to make his Gil mesh mark, like if he properly evaluates, let's say Aaron Nola, I'm just using as it could be anybody of that class, but if there's somebody out there that they are confident will stay healthy, whose best years are still to come, that would be a very bold move I'd love to see them take. They are much more likely to go down to the next tier as long as they stay above the Jordan Lyles tier. There's 2 guys that are, very high variance, but are guys that if the Royals were committed to trying to go after, they could probably win in a I don't want to say a bidding war. There won't be a bidding war. They'll have to give a 2-year contract. But the 2 guys I'm thinking of are Lucas Giolito, who's been all over the map. He had a 3-year stretch where he was one of the best pitchers in the American League. But this past year with the White Sox, he was very good. They traded him to the Angels, and then he had an ERA of like 7 for the rest of the year. So nobody knows what you're getting with Lucas Giolito, but that's an opportunity if the Royals think they know what's wrong with him and can fix him, to get a guy who's been at the very least a very durable pitcher for the last 5 years or so, but who has some definite upside. The other guy in that category is Jack Flaherty, who also was traded midseason. He wasn't having. He's had a good couple of years. They didn't have a disappointing year with the Cardinals. They traded him to Baltimore, and he's been probably even more disappointing with the Orioles. But only 27 years old. The raw skill set is still there. Both those guys struck out over a man an inning. And if you think, you have to give those guys 2 or maybe even 3 years, but if you actually fix them, that might be a good thing. If you end up giving these guys 3 years, 40 million, and they actually pitch well in year 1, you'll be happy to have them under contract for the next 2 years. Something along those lines. I mean, the point is, even if you screw it up, you've got money to spend, and you've got no one else to spend on it. Now, if they go out and they give Bobby Witt a long-term deal and they front load it and he gets $35 million in year one, I will accept that as an alternative to spending on a free agent. The point is, you have payroll, a gap in the payroll for next year. Fill it with some talent.
Wouldn't that be like, how excited would you be if they said, okay, we mentioned they're $70 million away from the league average payroll right now. If they gave 50 million up front year one, call it signing bonus, what have you, to Bobby Witt Jr. to get the deal done and to bring his number down moving forward, that like, look, this is how much we can spend. We project that we'll be this much better this year. So we should be able to have that money. Like, and then they didn't go out and really add anything else payroll wise. They say to it, would you be satisfied with that?
If that was part of a contract, that free agent contract that bought out 3 or 4 years of free agency, absolutely.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, the single most important thing the Royals can do, that if it is possible, if Bobby Witt is willing, is to secure his services from ages 27 to 30 or whatever. I mean, that's more important than adding a 32-year-old pitcher or whatever. So yes, and I think it's an incredibly creative and frankly wise decision to front load that deal.
Yes,
which gives him, is a benefit to him because you're getting the money up front. But it is something you are capable of doing because your payroll is low now, and your hope is in 3 years, when you actually have a good team, you will have other players you need to spend money on, and you're going to have a big payroll. I don't know, frankly, why teams don't do that more, but you are starting to see the industry, when young players are getting long-term deals, they're not as backloaded as they used to be. You're starting to see teams, or even with free agents, 28, 29-year-old free agents. It used to be that their money would continue to slowly go up over the length of the contract. And then by the time they're 38, not only are they useless, but they're being paid like, look at Miguel Cabrera's contract. He's being paid $32 million and he's useless. But you're seeing teams more and more give guys a 10-year deal, but by the end, they're actually getting paid less than at the beginning. So I think that the industry is starting to pick up on this, the wisdom of this idea. But the Royals have an opportunity to do something nobody's done, which is, like you said, maybe not 50 million, but maybe 35 million in the first year of a contract to a 23-year-old. But if it allows you to keep the average value later in the contract down, do it by all means.
Yeah, I like this. It also makes Witt more tradable, later on. I agree. And I think that's one of the things that I believe is key, that if you're going to do a deal for Bobby Witt Jr., you can't be handing out a no trade clause for him. We've discussed that you can then go in, negotiate, and get to that eventually. But I'd like it to become a team policy that doesn't happen, and you start with Bobby Witt Jr., and then everyone who gets signed after that, you say Bobby Witt Jr. didn't get it, and you're not getting it either. Because I think the Royals have to be more transactional. We can't sit here and be like, they got to be transactional and then champion the idea of something in a contract that doesn't allow them to be transactional. But I first of all, let's be clear. This isn't going to happen. No one in baseball has done this. I would love it if they would. It's out of the box thinking. And if you have, the resources and they're not being used, this would be the best way to use them to put yourself. I firmly believe it's going to be the future of the NFL salary cap. As soon as somebody, really wants to win bad enough and gets a bold enough general manager and an owner that doesn't just hire people of analytics. He came up in that game and is smart enough to understand the math of it and wants to win. I'd love to see the Royals be that team. I don't think that would be them, but yeah, I mean, it would be smart.
I would love for us to get to the point where we don't have to say, I would love for the Royals to do X, but I don't think they're the team to do that. I would love for us to no longer have to say that, because nobody says that about the Rays or all the other teams that they've acknowledged they want to emulate. So I'm really hoping that the Royals do something this offseason that makes you and I say, wait a minute, maybe we don't need to put that caveat on the Royals anymore. Maybe they will do something bold and creative that no other team has done before.
We're proudly brought to you by our friends at Gann Asphalt and Concrete, serving the entire Kansas City metro area. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. You can get a free consultation. No commissions, in-house crews. Every project comes with a written warranty. Just go to GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Rany, my last one. You ready? a
Yep.
bat. I want a 30 homer bat. I want, it doesn't have to be exactly 30, but 24, 25 homers, 35 homers. I want a real bat, the Danny Tartable type of acquisition. I don't know how they'll do it. Frankly, I think most likely you're looking at, again, the free agent market, because I don't know what they have to trade
Right.
to
Now,
get there.
are you basically saying then that Nelson Velasquez is not that guy?
No, I like Nelson Velasquez, but I want another one.
Okay.
I want them to bring
For
in
the outfield, that's the other thing. Is it where do you have?
well, I want the team to fit. So to me, you've got flexibility. Make it fit however you want to make it fit. But I think they need another legitimate veteran run producer. Like I said, I love the idea of a Danny Tartable type guy, a guy who can drive in runs and be it what's his name, the DH during the 15 World
Kendrys
Series,
Morales.
Kendrys Morales. I'm talking about something along those lines to add some depth to the lineup, so that you're not talking about only 4 or 5 guys deep in this lineup. I think they need to bring in a veteran arm and a veteran bat. I think they need those two things to elongate both the rotation and the lineup.
So that one I'm not as sure about, only because you talk about making the team fit, and I just worry that they've already got enough guys on this team that have, positional, are limited defensively, that I'm not sure, unless you trade some of those guys, and maybe you do. Like,
Right.
Edward Olivares right now, he was maybe the best hitter on the team in September, and he absolutely cannot play the field, but it's like I do not want to give up on that bat. Velasquez, I think at this point needs to play every day.
Let's see, but that's
Pasquantino will be back. So I'm just like, if this is in conjunction with trading one of those guys or multiple guys because you feel like they have more value in the trade market than what you actually think they're capable of, then I'm on board. But I worry if you add bat to this lineup right now, this roster, it's going to just recreate the same problems we're having with the positions.
I think that I guess I object somewhat fundamentally to your statement right there. That's their problem. That's why the team doesn't fit, because they're always sitting around waiting for Edward Olivares to become something. They're sitting around waiting for MJ Melendez. No more. I will let me ask you this. If you put Danny Tartable on this team, he's here, poof. No one else is gone. Danny Tartable's here. Who do you run out there in the outfield?
Well, I mean, we're starting Danny Tartable somewhere, right? So
he's in right field.
Right, he's in right field. I probably have Velasquez in left, and then Drew Waters and Kyle Isbell. Sort of. There's a rotation between those 3 guys, let's say.
So Edward Olivares doesn't get to play. Fine.
Right.
Somebody will get hurt. He'll get to play then. Or you know what? He wasn't good enough. Like, I think the key is MJ Melendez cannot be gifted right field. This was an evaluation.
Oh, I agree. I mean, that's why he's very high on the list of guys to clear off the roster, precisely because it eliminates this problem and allows you to do something like bringing in a veteran bat.
Yeah. I mean, like that's what I want is by doing that, you by the way, there's your answer. I love somebody said, I wonder if the front office watches this show. I don't know. There's some folks in the organization that I know have peeked at it a time or two. But no, I don't think we're scripting out their off-season game plan. I think a lot of these conversations have already been had. And I'm sure some of these ideas have already been discussed and may or may not happen. Trust me, they're not going to make trades because Rany and I said make trades. As much as we might like to think. But no, listen, my point to this is you've got to get away. In my opinion, this organization was almost like rewarded wrongly so for just waiting around for the young guys and giving everybody their at-bats and waiting for the 1,500 at-bats. And so Moose got to develop into that's not how it's supposed to be. You're supposed to come up and take the job.
Right.
And I need to see more of that. And so if these outfielders, I don't care which ones you get rid of. I really don't. I just make it fit and go get some guys that will force other players to have to be good and not know that their name, like, listen, I'm with you. I like, Massey, but like he, as bad as he was to start the year, like, come on, like real organizations, you don't just keep going out there, right? There's got to be somebody else that says, no, you got to go, man. We have someone else.
Well, it's what's so frustrating is that going back to, like you mentioned, Misakis and Hosmer and the whole 1500 bat, canard, which is this idea that players take 2-3 seasons to really develop. No, they don't. They actually don't in most organizations. What's so frustrating is with the Royals, they have had young players or rookies, prospects who come up and play well right out of the chute, but it's almost never the guys that they were actually thinking were top prospects. Like Whit Merrifield, developed much faster than Hosmer and Moustakas did. Look at this year. Freddie Fermin, who was nobody's idea of a prospect, he didn't need 1,500 at bats. He needed about 15 and was suddenly like one of the best hitters on the team. That's what's frustrating. Whereas the guys that you really, are banking on come up and struggle. And I agree with you that they kind of have to stop assuming that is normal. Look at Nick Prado. Nick Prado at this point, like, I'm not saying he won't develop, but if he does, it'll be very unusual to have been this bad for as many at bats as he has been without a radical change in his approach. His strikeout rate this year was still it was almost 40%. God, I think it was exactly 40% of his plate appearances he struck out. Do you know? That's just insane. 40%. So, yeah, move on from Nick Prado, or at the very least, just stash him in Omaha and make him prove to you that he's a completely different hitter for a couple hundred at bats next year. This is one of the reasons why I'm excited about Nick Lofton. I mean, it was only 60 plate appearances or so, but he played well right out of the gate. We didn't have to wait for Nick Lofton to show something. So yes, I mean, I think we're both in agreement on that front, that like they've got to stop giving these guys so much rope, that they should have expectations that you come up, you're ready to play. If you're not, then maybe you should just stay in AAA for a little longer.
Yeah, there have to be consequences for the inability of getting it done. The inability to get it done. You have to pay a price for that. All right. Anything else? I know we said we do 3. Would you have any other things that jump at you?
No, those are the big things. I mean, like I said, JJ has demonstrated an ability to be successful in the transactional department. So lean on that string. I want to see if that's not just a fluke and is actually a talent that he possesses. And use the fact that you have money to spend to your advantage. I mean, there's ways. I don't expect this team to be a contender next year, but bare minimum, they have to win 70 games next year. And really, I think 75 wins is a reasonable, especially the way you finish the season. Back when they looked like they were going to lose, they were going to win 48 games or whatever. That was a big jump. They won 56. 14-game jump to 70 is not really a big deal. I mean, if they just play for a full season like they played the last 2 months of this year, that's 75 wins right there. So, but to do that, they need to add some talent, and they have multiple avenues by which to do that.
Yep. And we'll see if they get it done. You can get it done with GAN Asphalt and Concrete if you own a business or you manage a business. Don't let accidents, liability issues be a problem with your parking lot. Get your parking lot restriped today. A brightly striped lot will cut down on problems, keeping you back at work, not wasting your time running around dealing with stuff you shouldn't deal with. Let GAN Asphalt and Concrete fix your parking lot problems today. They've been doing it since 1994. Find them online at GANasphalt.com. Rany, what can we learn from the 12 playoff teams? Right? I like to do this every year. Put together little Excel spreadsheets of what the average payrolls are, what the average runs and runs allowed are, just to give people an idea. The average playoff payroll was 170 million. The Royals payroll this year was 91. Which means that they've got to be angling towards. It doesn't mean they have to spend 80 million this year, but that's where they need to get to. The other thing that I think is interesting, and for a long time, you would find that the sweet spot when they had 10 playoff teams, generally speaking, I would do this, and on average, there'd be 4 in the top 10 payrolls, 4 in the middle 10, and 2 in the bottom 10. This year, there are 6 in the top 10. I'll give you my theory on why that is, see if you agree. There are 2 in the middle 10. That's the Minnesota Twins and Milwaukee Brewers coming at 16 and 19. By the way, the top 10 are Texas 4, Philly 5, Dodgers 6, Astros 7, Blue Jays 9, and Braves 10. And then there are 4 in the bottom 10. 21 Arizona, 22 Miami, 27 Tampa, 28 Baltimore. By the way, the Royals are 26th, as you said earlier, in payroll. That's where they sit. So I think that's of note. One, bottom teams can still make the playoffs. I do think the sweet spot will remain the middle 10. I think some of these teams, Tampa's obviously made an art form out of getting to the postseason with low payrolls. The Orioles, Marlins, and Diamondbacks are just young teams. They're early in their rebuild, and probably they are more the benefactor of some crappy work being done in the middle 10 that has allowed them to arrive a year early.
Right.
And their payrolls will probably go up, and they'll fit into that neighborhood. But I don't know about you. When I see 6 in the top 10, and I know that the Mets and Yankees and Red Sox are not any of these, that's scary. That says the teams that have money know what to do with it now and are not just wasting it on a bunch of bad contracts that have bloated their payroll. The Mets did, right? That was their deal, taking on a lot of age in addition to a lot of payroll. To me, when I see that, that's kind of scary how good the top 10 is performing in my mind.
I'm gonna disagree with you on this one, and I'm gonna give you one very good reason. It's so basic that sometimes we overlook it. There are more teams in the top 10 this year, in part because there are more teams. Period. There's 12 playoff teams now.
That's a good point.
Not 10. And 12 out of 30 is 40%. Think about that. 40% of all teams are in the playoffs. So this year, 60% of the top 10 are in the playoffs. 20% of the middle 10, because like you said, there are a lot of teams in the middle 10 that just spent their money poorly. And then 40% of the bottom 10. Like, in other words, if you were at a bottom 10 payroll this year, you had the exact same odds of making the playoffs as every team in baseball in general did. And so if you told me right now that going forward, every year, 6 of the top 10 payrolls will make the playoffs, exactly 6, I would probably take that. Because that means there's still 6 other playoff spots left over for the other 20 teams, which, okay, so instead of a 40% chance, you got a 30% chance. I think those are reasonable odds, and especially playing in the American League Central, where you may not have a single one of those, a single AL Central team that has a top 10 payroll. The Tigers have ran it for a time, but I'm not sure they're in a position to do that anymore. The White Sox may be on the fringes of that when they're good. The Twins may be on the fringes, but there's no dominant payroll in this division. I'm not too worried about that.
So the 2 teams that we're at, we do know who the 2 teams are, right? They were the bottom teams to make the playoffs. Do you know who they are?
The bottom teams in terms of payroll, or
the last teams to make it. So the teams that are in this year that wouldn't have been in.
Oh, right, yeah. So I guess the Marlins,
and Diamondbacks tied.
Right.
So it's
okay,
one of those 2.
One of those, and then the American League. Well, the Twins would have won because they were in the division. It would have been either the Rangers or the Blue Jays.
Blue Jays,
right.
Which is a top 10 payroll.
Okay.
So to your point. So it looks one of them is one of the additional teams is a top 10 payroll. So look, I mean, again, when you have 16, 19, 21, 22, 27, and 28 in, that's where they rank in payroll. There's no excuses for the Royals.
Exactly. I was going to say, look, I mean, I'm certainly not going to argue that more money isn't better. Like, in general, yes, teams that can spend more money are going to be better. But as you just pointed out, there is no common thread that connects all 12 playoff teams when you look at money. There are rich teams that make the playoffs. There are poor teams that make the playoffs, or at least teams with low payroll. But the common thread that pretty much every team you can say is they are making smart decisions. I mean, almost every team that made the playoffs this year is a testament to smart decision making. I mean, you think about like the Orioles, and one of the surprise teams, maybe the best story in baseball to my mind this year. Orioles winning 101 games. I mean, in Cal Ripken's entire career, they never won 100 games. They haven't won 101 games since Earl Weaver was manager. That is a testament to a smart GM being hired, great draft picks. It's not because the Angelos family was spending a lot of money, right? This isn't a testament to great ownership. In fact, I would say even Orioles fans right now are pretty justifiably upset with their owner for being so tone deaf, trying to get a new stadium contract. And they finally signed an extension on Camden Yards here just a few days ago. But the Orioles are being extremely well marked. The Brewers, maybe the most, when you talk about year in, year out consistency and winning on a low payroll, I don't think the Brewers get enough credit. I don't think Brewers get any credit, and they are a fabulously run team. Craig Counsell might be the best manager in baseball, certainly the best manager nobody talks about, right? Smart decision making. The Rays, obviously, we know about that. The Rangers went out and hired Bruce Bochy to be their manager this year with his track record of success, and lo and behold, they won 90 games this year. The only team maybe that I wouldn't put in that category, the Marlins, I'm still not sold on them, in part because they had the lowest run differential of any playoff team in the history of baseball. Right, but even the Marlins do seem to have a knack for developing pitching. Sandy Alcantara and Yuri Perez. I mean, they've actually developed, a fair amount of pitching, and in particular, I think they're good about identifying and developing talent from Latin America, which makes sense for a team based in Miami. But still, there are things here the Royals can learn. It has nothing to do with spending money. It has to do with using your dollars wisely, having analytics, and drafting and developing well.
If we were to use the expected wins and losses, the Marlins wouldn't be in and the Padres would, and it would be more big money. Right. Because the run differentials of there's 100+ difference. Minus 54, I think, for the Marlins, and plus.
So the Padres are, an incredibly unlucky team this year. But what's funny to me is that the Padres, they spend a lot of money, and yet it's the reason why that team has had success, I think.
It's 74 and 88, their expected win loss.
The Marlins? Yeah, the Marlins, like I said, basically the run differential, they're the worst playoff team in history, right? Whereas the Padres just had this unbelievably bad record in one-run games. Their expected win-loss was 92 and 70. This is why they play the games, man. Sometimes you just, you have a lucky season or an unlucky season. But when I look at the Padres, I mean, the reason they're so good is not simply because they're spending money. It's because, when they did spend money, they spent tons of money in Latin America, buying up like 16-year-olds, and they've done a poor job, I think, of, they've made some bad trades in order to win in the here and now. But at the same time, they used their farm system to get Blake Snell. And, they used their farm system to get Juan Soto. So, yeah, they're spending some money, but also they used prospects to bring in some of those players. So, again, if you're drafting and developing well, it papers over almost every mistake you can make. I mean, Baseball America, every year they have like their number one, minor league system, number one organization in the sport, right? The top farm system in the game. And, I think what this year was like the Orioles, and lo and behold, they made the playoffs, which extends the streak. I think every single team that they have ranked as the number one farm system in baseball has made the playoffs. I think every team made it within like 2 years, with the one exception. That was the Royals. It took them 3 years, but then they went to back-to-back World Series, right? But like within 2 years, every single team, there's one exception, has made the playoffs, from great farm system to playoffs. Develop the farm system. And that's why, again, especially the way the Royals finished, it's not their win-loss record at the major league level that is what's so frustrating about the season. It's the fact that the minor leagues took a step backward as well.
Yeah, for sure. And then the other thing I like to look at is the runs, and how far away the Royals are from being an average playoff team. All right. The average playoff team this year scored 808 runs. The Royals scored 676. That's a long way. That's 132 runs they've got to find.
Yep.
We're getting towards a run a game. We're talking about basically 3/4 of a run per game. Runs allowed, the Royals gave up 859 runs. Your average playoff team gave up 696. They have to give up 163 runs fewer. 1 run a game. Almost basically, if you want to rule of thumb it, find a run on offense, lose a run allowed. That is a lot.
It is a lot. There is an optimistic slant on this, which is on the hitting side, at least. I was really optimistic going into the season that all the young hitters the Royals had, that this offense would be would take a big step forward. And then they went out in the first half of the season at the All-Star break. They were second to last in the majors in runs scored, ahead of only the Oakland A's. So they were 29th in baseball in runs scored in the first half, which is a big reason why they were, 29-75 at one point. After the All-Star break, the Royals were 13th in the major leagues in runs scored. Above, there are 12 playoff teams, right on the margins of being a playoff team in that category. They were 12th in OPS. It wasn't just that they were lucky or, hitting well with runners in scoring position. In September, they were 6th in the majors in runs scored, 7th in OPS. And some of that is players playing much better in the second half, like MJ Melendez, Michael Massey, mentioned those guys. Some of it was new players that were in the in the lineup. Instead of Hunter Dozier, you had Nelson Velasquez, and you had Nick Lofton in September. So I mean, the players that were taking the field in September were different than the guys in April, and there was improvement there. So obviously, they still have they still have steps to take offensively to get to a playoff caliber team, but I feel like it's a much smaller step on the offense side. The pitching side is still a disaster. Like, look, they were better than last year on the pitching side, but not by much. And the bar last year was literally the worst pitching staff in the American League in 60 years. So they weren't last in runs allowed. They were next to last. They weren't last in walks. I think they were 12th in walks allowed. And they were still dead last in strikeouts. Like, we can talk about Cole Reagans all we want, but there's only one Cole Reagans, and they don't miss enough bats. Some of that, yes, is Zack Greinke being a finesse pitcher, but it's not all him. But nowadays, the average team strikes out a batter an inning. So you look at a guy like Brady Singer, who's at 7.5 strikeouts per 9. That's well below average, even for a starting pitcher. And there are a bunch of finesse guys in the bullpen. So they've got to take. This is why I feel like they need to spend, if they're going to bring in new talent, I'm much more inclined to lean on bringing in more pitchers. I think that their pitching development's better, but it's still got a long way to go.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Anything? Any other lessons for around baseball that you saw that the Royals need to take to heart?
Well, I think it's interesting as the season ended that to see some of the managers who were let go for poor performance. We saw Buck Showalter being let go in New York. We saw Gabe Kapler being let go by the Giants. Who had a disappointing year, maybe even 2 disappointing years. But 2 years ago, the Giants had one of the most astonishing seasons I've ever seen, 107 wins. But teams have standards, and like high standards. And if you don't meet them, you get fired. I mean, Buck Showalter has been a very good manager for a very long time, but like a lot of managers, they lose effectiveness after a few years at a job. And sometimes, one bad season is enough to lose your job. And I feel like I'm not saying this is something JJ Piccolo has done in the past, but the Royals as an organization have been too slow to hold people to high standards, both players and pitching coaches, and managers. I don't think Matt Quintero deserves to be fired, certainly after this season, but it's just a lesson to take to heart, I think.
Yeah, no, I do too. And I thought the couple of things. One, Gabe Kapler, I don't look at the Giants. I don't see a really good team. So I'm not sure what they were thinking. I get what the Mets did. I wonder how much, like, the moves they made don't seem like Buck Showalter moves. And I feel almost like the firing of Buck Showalter is like Buck Showalter told them this isn't going to work, and it didn't work. And they didn't need him around telling him, I told you so. Right?
Right.
Because like that's his teams don't make those kind of moves, and they don't have those kind of regressions. So I do find that interesting. But the one thing that does jump at me is that like there's accountability, and they're saying this isn't good enough and we're going to make change. And the idea that, well, we don't know if it's his fault. Well, it doesn't matter. He wasn't the solution. Right. And there are other guys out there. The idea that, well, we don't want to fire him. Same thing. The Royals mindset on, their prospects. Well, we don't want to be wrong. We don't want to cut ties with MJ Melendez too early, or Nick Prado, and have them go be a star somewhere else. They seem constantly more afraid of that happening than they are optimistic about getting it right. And I think that's the other thing. If you fire someone and he goes on to be a good manager somewhere else, fine. If you're at a point where you're like, this doesn't work for whatever reason, none of it's not his fault at all, but it's not how we want to do it. Then you make your move. And I do think that is, I'm with you. The managers was one of the things I was looking at. I'm not for firing Matt Quatraro. I don't think Matt Quatraro should go. I think Matt Quatraro should be back with the Kansas City Royals. But I think across the board in the front office, where you talk about bringing somebody in, like I wouldn't mind seeing a few people can too, right?
Yeah.
Like and if we don't have any room for somebody, which baseball doesn't operate that way. If they find good people, they'll usually bring them in. But like I think it's okay to let somebody go and even be wrong for letting him go because there are other good people out there, and you can't be paralyzed by the fact that he might be good somewhere else. Get over it. Get over it.
Well, I mean, it's not. Some of these are not even close calls. Like it's one thing if you to maybe let go of a guy. He's only been in his job for a year or two and hasn't really had a chance to show, to bear fruit. But when you've got guys in your front office, you just open up the Royals front office directory. Every guy's been there for like 15 years. Like the track record is the track record. All right. So, I think accountability is something that differentiates well-run teams from poorly run teams. Like in a lot of other areas, JJ Piccolo has definitely made strides there. He's made progress, but it is slow and it needs to speed up.
Have we seen the last of Zack Greinke?
I suspect we have. I would love for him to come back for one more year. I've not had my fill. I can accept one more year. I know, there's this thinking, well, he wasn't nearly as good as, he was last year. And, he has nothing left in the tank. I'm not convinced, in part because you mentioned earlier, but the team, like every Royals team he's ever been on, the team did him no favors. One thing I look at here, if you look at FIP, right, fielding independent pitching, his FIP this year was 475. 2 years ago with the Astros, it was 471. So by fielding independent pitching, meaning home runs, strikeouts, and walks, the three things that a pitcher can really control, he was essentially the same pitcher this year he was 2 years ago. 2 years ago, he had a 4.16 ERA and went 11-6. This year, he went at a 5.06 ERA and went 2-15 because the defense, certainly in the first half of the season, sucked. And he's not. He's a command and control guy now. He relies on his defense. He's not striking out everybody out, but he's also not walking anybody. And as long as he's throwing strikes, and if he has a good defense, he'll be fine. But the first half of the season, the defense was not fine, and then the Royals scored a pitiful amount of runs for him. I think he had the lowest run support of any pitcher in baseball this year. So it's a reflection of the fact that, what looks like a decline is actually a lot of it is the team around him, and it's not Zack Greinke himself.
Yeah, I agree. I hope Zack Greinke is back. I hope this isn't it for Zack. I know there was kind of a feeling that was it. And I'll go a step further, and it's one of the, we're not going to do our Jordan Lyles dance here tonight, but I think WHIP, I know we've got FIP and XFIP and all these different things that are there, ERA plus and everything. The walks plus hits divided by innings pitched to me is still one of the great indicators of how well a guy is pitching. Both these guys had WHIPs under 1.3, 1.244 for Lyles, 1.272. Why they don't have the FIP and the ERA, in addition, the just regular ERA is largely because of the defense around them. They give up the long ball. They give up the home run. And, I don't think either one of them is ever going to get away from that. But I do think that if you were not putting guys on base because you ran by the baseball, those are solo home runs and not 2 and 3 run shots. Those are rallies. And so I think there's a lot of reason to believe that both those guys can be much more effective and actually were more effective than what some of their other numbers are. But for Greinke and what I think if Zack Greinke wants to pitch again for the Royals, there's a spot on the roster. Number one, I'll add in that keeps the depth up there and forces young pitchers to be good to get onto the roster. And I'm all for that. But I also think there's something to be said for having a Hall of Famer walking around in your dugout. Even if he's a cat that's totally different from anybody who's ever played this game. Zack Greinke walks in that locker room, there is respect. That is a man who's gotten thousands of guys out. And I hope.
And it's still doing it with stuff that's a fraction of what the other pitchers have, right? And,
yes,
they see this guy topping out at 90, and in 2023, this isn't 1996. A 90-mile-an-hour fastball, then fine. Nobody throws 90. You have a handful of guys who do that. And by the end of the season, I mean, we had a 5.06 ERA. Like I said, his FIP was better than that. He was not the worst pitcher on the team by any means. And he was better at, I was looking it up here in part because the defense got better. From August 1st on, he had a 3.99 FIP and a 3.98 ERA. So his ERA and FIP matched, and he was better. I signed me up for a 3.98 ERA from him next year in a heartbeat. But yeah, the other guys see that and be like, okay, what is it he's doing that is allowing him to succeed without velocity? Can I emulate that?
Yeah, for sure. All right. Anything else you want to leave off with?
No, it's going to be a long off season, Soren. Well, we'll pace ourselves, but we'll get into breaking down the performance of the different parts of the team here. We'll start giving out our report cards at some point here soon.
We've got report cards coming up next. If you want a great report card on your parking lot, Gann Asphalt and Concrete is the place to go. They've been solving parking lot problems since 1994. You can call Gann Asphalt and Concrete at 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Any problems you've got, they've been making them disappear. Like I said, 30 years they've been doing that in Kansas City. Find them online right now at gannasphalt.com. And I'll throw this out. Yeah. For Bruce, this bears mentioning. R.I.P. Tim Wakefield. I don't know, Randy, if you ever got a chance to speak to Tim Wakefield. I did. I got to interview him several times at the American Century Championships in Lake Tahoe, and couldn't have been a finer gentleman. Nice guy, fun to talk to him. One of the great baseball careers of all time. Not going to make it as a first baseman. Well, have you seen my knuckler? Here it is. And then to be a super productive part of championship teams was amazing, and by all accounts, a better guy than he was pitcher, and he was an amazing pitcher at that. So, yes, R.I.P.
Absolutely one of my favorite, certainly non-Royals players, really pitchers or otherwise. And I've always been a fan of the pitchers with the unconventional repertoires, the knuckleballers, the sidearmers. I think the game is better when you have those guys in the sport. And in my lifetime, I think he's the best knuckleball pitcher. He's certainly the most longest stretch of success, part of that amazing 04 Red Sox team. And like you said, the reputation as an absolute gentleman. Life's not fair, and it's sad that we lost him suddenly and so soon.
Yeah, well said. All right, that's going to do it for us for the good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli. I'm Soren Petro saying thank you very much for joining us here on Kaufman Corner.